Hello, hello. I'm glad to be here today. I'm recording another video for you guys. Trying to make sure we get our content out. I have to apologize. We've been away for some time, and then we also released my thoughts on Cornell West versus Ta-Nehisi Coates. I know that's been quite a while ago, but we released that, and we're also going to be having this conversation that we're having today. I want to introduce myself. I want to first say welcome to the Takedown with Nick. I'm your host, Nick Nowlin, and I'm also going to be joined by Richard here. And, this is the Takedown, Subverting Power, Radical Thought. Richard, I'm glad to have you with us. Go ahead and say hello to the people.
Thank you so much for having me, Nick. I'm glad to be here. And we had a spirited discussion before we started recording, and you'll be able to get some of it in this conversation. And I look forward to it. It's going to be a great show. You're definitely gonna want to watch this whole one. I'll get back to you, Nick.
All right, all right. I mean, I want to start this off by talking about, the theme of today is really going to be, propaganda. And I talk about it all the time. I talk about, big time themes like propaganda all the freaking time. But I think, we've had a very successful storytelling done by Disney in recent time. And so I want to kind of talk about kind of like where I fall as far as the discussion around the movie kind of goes. I know everybody's kind of had their own 2 cents to put in, and I've kind of been grappling with it myself because there's a lot of stuff going on here. And I feel like at this point I can finally kind of succinctly make some good points that I think that should serve as a baseline for how I see this movie and how I'm going to use that as a framework to kind of review the movie. Like, first off, some people will say, well, don't try to look too far into it. It's just a story, it's just fantasy. And I'm going to push back on that. Like, storytelling is powerful. Storytelling, as far as telling stories, that used to be the way people learn morals and things. Human beings are associative. Like, when you tell a story, you can get across several points that just by the written language or even through demonstration that you just couldn't. By being able to associate themes and overarching things, you can reinforce ideologies. You can do a lot of stuff with storytelling. And so when we go in and we watch a story, our defenses are down. And when your defenses are down, that's when it's time to hit you with the propaganda. Every single time those defenses are down, you have to hit you with the propaganda. And sometimes it's not even conscious propaganda. It's something that you've consumed so much that it affects you at the subconscious level, that you accept certain things, that you see certain things as normal, that you sort of fall within an ideology without even knowing it. And that's why, you have to police the type of stories that are told. And that's why you have to be very, very careful. And I hate to say it like this, but if in Harry Potter, there was a character and he says, well, how do you defend against the darkness? And he looked at it and he says, constant vigilance. And to be honest with you, that's really what you need. You need to be careful about what you imbibe as far as storytelling and realize it's more than just a story, particularly for those that are a little bit younger or to the uninitiated. What do you think about that, Richard?
I think you raised up some very valuable points. I mean, most of human history we know, through storytelling. It was oral traditions, and then written tradition, and then finally, eventually, we kind of came across the idea of documenting history in a more documentative sense. Although it's clear that even now today, we see the propaganda versions of stories, and so with that in mind. I think your point about constant vigilance is critically important. To be skeptical of any story you're being told, not just of the facts of the story, but of what may be being woven between the threads of the story that you may not be aware of.
Yeah, and I think particularly when we're talking about this Black Panther story, there's a couple of things that kind of come off in my mind. Number one is you know there's a lot of talk about black representation, and while there are black actors that were represented in that, like, I feel like at a certain point, I'm wondering the actual inside of the setting of the movie itself, like why we're so quick to identify ourselves with these characters when they don't share any type of heritage or history with us. And when I say us, I mean Black people as Americans and as Black Americans in the United States. Like in many ways, like I feel like we shouldn't identify with them as deeply as we do. I feel like that's a little bit problematic in its own right because we have to think about it in the setting, where we do exist in the storyline. We do exist as Americans in this storyline. These are individuals that chose not to intercede on our behalf on many of the things that happen to us. So, like, if they were to exist in our real world, how would you look at them? Would you see yourself in them, or would you see, a largely, complicit or apathetic group of individuals that could have helped but chose not to for whatever reason? And to be honest with you, they were technologically superior. There's no reason not to help other than it just didn't feel like it. That's really what it was. And so I'm wondering like how we can see these people and be and a lot of memes are going around Wakanda forever. And I'm just looking at myself like, what is this Wakanda forever? And then on top of that, I hate to say it like this, but you got fools that want to go out there and wear the dashiki and all that stuff as if we know where it comes from, or we have a real identification with the heritage of the countries, that stuff comes from. And a lot of times we really don't. We don't have no clue. We just look ridiculous out there wearing a dashiki just to go see a movie. It's not even. Okay, let's go. Let's start there. I've ranted a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people just wanted to be proud of their blackness and be connected to something bigger and deeper than slavery, And I think that, well, whether that was, I agree with you. It can look foolish, and it can also be counterproductive if you're not recognizing or appreciating or attempting to discover or understand the history of the type of artifacts or the presentation features that you might be using, whether it's a particular necklace, headwear, or clothing in general. I think it's an interesting point you raise about seeing ourselves in Wakanda or in these people, and I think a lot of it is just desperation and just finally being able to not have to see as Ben noted in his article, not having to see past the whiteness of the characters to be able to relate to them. That person kind of looks like me in some way. I think a lot of people were reaching out for that, and I think in a lot of ways this is the capitalist and corporate system taking advantage of that, which is one of the reasons why I didn't want to support the movie. But at the same time, I also wanted one of the biggest Marvel, or like one of the best-selling Marvel movies, to be one that was primarily black. But I also, on the other hand, I don't want to look to corporations for salvation. And it's like, so this was also an internal struggle for myself as far as even seeing the movie. But go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, like on my screen, it just looks like it froze a little bit. But no. I think you make a good point here. But at the same time, what I would say is, I know we want to relate to characters, but at a certain point, we should also be able to accept our own heritage. I know nobody wants to hear a slave story anymore, but why don't you want to hear it? Like, we haven't been that history is us. If you don't want to see that on the screen, you don't want to see us.
Yeah, it wasn't a very good.
What you're saying,
it wasn't good for me to I watched right before I watched the Black Panther. I finally got around to watching 12 Years a Slave. I had avoided it for a long time just because I thought it was going to make me either angry or sad, and it did both. And so I can understand not wanting to think about that because it like Baldwin said, to be a Negro in America and be aware is to be in a constant state of rage. Paraphrasing a bit, but if you know our history, if you know your culture, you know how this country is treating you, it's enraging. I think that's the only reasonable thing. And people don't like to be enraged all the time.
Yeah, and look, nobody wants to be mad all the time. I'm not saying you have to go around being mad all the time. But what I'm saying is, the need to escape that rage, you tend to want to escape being who you are. Like, we can't unring the bell. The bell has been rung. This is who you are. This is what it is. And when you try to escape that and you try too hard, you end up forgetting who you are and where we are. And you start seeing yourselves in these people like Wakanda and these Wakandans, excuse me, like these people, in any real sense of the word, that, but it's just a weird thing, and I think it's something we have to digest. It's cool. They're dark skinned like you. They could have been you, but I mean, again, I think somebody else says it's better than I do, but in Wakanda and kind of like South Central East Africa or something like that. Like I know I said South Central East, but I meant like the southern half and then kind of east, but not quite on the coast, but like kind of in the middle of Africa, but like east, slightly to the east, but in the middle of Africa on the south side. And there's no other way to see that other than to see the movie and to see the scene where they zoom out and show you where it's at.
Yeah.
Like, when they zoom out and show you where it's at, you kind of get that on the map. And, most slaves, which is going to be, our ancestors, they came from, West Africa. So, and being able to acknowledge that all of these people are fundamentally and radically different should allow you to say, if anything, you should be claiming a kinship or heritage with the residents of West Africa, not necessarily, a fictional country of Africans who also happened to stand by while the slave trade and colonization and stuff of Africa happened and didn't do a damn thing.
Yeah, like, and presumably they could watch the whole thing, and their reaction to seeing their brothers and sisters be shipped off to be slaves was, bye. Like, why would you want to relate to those people?
Yeah, now I'm gonna get off of that because nobody wants to hear about me telling them how they should see blackness and all that. I'm just kind of laying out how I feel about it and like why I think it's a little silly or a little bit excessive.
Yeah, I had a similar
enthusiasm.
I felt the emotions of pulling at my heartstrings of seeing black people powerful and represented in a positive light, but also being shown.
What black people did you see up there? Are you talking about just like black skinned people?
Yeah.
I didn't see any black people up there. I saw a black person. The only black person was up there was Killmonger. He was the villain.
Yeah, no, that's an important point.
And he played to all the tropes of the black man. And I was disappointed in that. And like for all the talk about it being progressive and all that, you had a black male here who was, violent, somewhat wild in how he did things. It just kind of played. He was almost over sexualized, but like I guess they cut that part out. But I thought there was a scene where like they were robbing a bank and they were like making out in the back seat or something like that from The Thrill or something like that. And I thought he was like an adrenaline junkie a little bit, and I was like, okay, whatever. I just thought it kind of played to a depiction of black males that's not particularly helpful. And in general, like whenever I watch a TV show or whenever I watch movies and they portray black males in that way, I tend to get angry because I feel like it's, we should kind of move past that. And I haven't seen that many people really levy a critique of like why they made Killmonger out to be that way. He didn't have to be that way. He could have been intellectual. He could have been calm and collected, but instead they kind of showed him as kind of like rage and, like unbridled rage and then like inconsistency. Like he was like all over the place in what he was saying and what he was doing. And like his motivations were kind of here. They try to put a little bit of it together, but they really didn't develop him as a character very well.
Yeah, we talked a little bit before we started recording about how he just wasn't consistent or he just didn't make sense as a character. Like they tried to jam too many identities into one person, one character representation, and not in a way as in, he has a disjointed personality of, like, or internal conflict or something like that. But they just...
he was very consistent the first half of the movie.
Yeah, they just jam these two conflicting identities into the same person.
Yeah, and I just thought it was very, very strange. And, like, some people are angry about certain things in the movie. That you just became king in trial by combat. You drank the plant, and now you're superhuman. The only other person that can challenge you is somebody who's drank the plant. So if you want to forestall any other challenges to your authority, you would just burn the plants. Damn tradition. Like you are there, to take over and change the way Wakanda is. They don't need that tradition. You can establish a monarchy if you want to. You can do whatever you want to. You're king. And so like, I think in that way he knew kind of how to use power and he knew how to keep it. He moved to actually keep it. And I understood burning those flowers. And other people were like, no, you shouldn't burn the flowers. And I was like, what do you mean? Nobody can challenge you if they haven't taken the flower. So, like, burn them. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ben in his piece mentions essentially that what it does do is it leaves the Wakandans without a Black Panther once he's gone. And so
No,
while it
the
secures
flower
his
can go
power,
back.
it does not secure power for his people, which again to me speaks to the unexplained conflict of the character in that like his goals and ambitions don't match up with the idea of selfish, power hungry, empire building.
Well, we don't understand if all the flowers are just gone or if they grow back. Like you just set fire down, and that doesn't mean they can't plant another seed. Like,
Yeah, presumably that they would be recoverable in some way.
yeah,
Like,
like I can understand forestalling, having people being able to directly challenge you while you're doing whatever you're doing. But like saying like that there will be no flowers in the future, that's not what that means. I think you just burn the flowers right there. Like that's not all of them, and that's not to say they can't grow more. We don't know. That's actually ambiguous, right?
yeah, and I mean,
But
we're deep in the symbology of a movie that was mostly made just to make money.
yeah, I mean, it was mostly made just to make money. And then, like at one point, like I sort of saw like the first half of the movie, I sort of saw in Killmonger, like to me, if white people were to go back, or like white people generally were to look at Malcolm X without any type of like real context or history or real knowledge, like I think they would draw something similar to Killmonger. Like I think he is like their depiction of kill. Like I think he is Killmonger is a white depiction of Malcolm X with like imperialism thrown in at the end so he can be killed as a villain.
Yeah, like yeah, exactly. It doesn't, and we were talking
And not much, just a cup. Like just add a little cup of imperialism at the end, like two sentences.
yeah. But then end with something that sounds as anti-imperialism as you could possibly get. Like,
No, yeah, I mean, that's for the people that are woke enough. Like they'll hear that line and think some type of way. I know when I heard that line, I was like, that was the best line in the movie.
yeah,
And I thought to myself, I was like, oh, they threw that in there specifically for people like me.
yeah,
Great.
like other people have already stopped paying attention to the movie at that point. like,
I
but
mean,
for me, that was
you know,
like that made everything, and one of the reasons why I found it in such found his character in such conflict and unexplained. Like you can have that type of conflict where I want this thing, but I'm going to go about it in a way that I would totally disapprove of, kind of thing. Like that's a normal conflict that can be explored, but they didn't explore that at all. It was just he's an evil person because he wants this thing and he's willing to do anything it takes to get it. Like,
yeah, I mean, and to me, like, when somebody says, well, he was just going about it the wrong way, I'm just wondering, I was like, well, let me ask you, like, how would his goals be achieved? I want to know. I seriously would like to know how he could just go up to America and be like, hey, could you stop oppressing black people? And they'd be like, oh, sure, you asked real nice, so we just gonna do that for you, just like that. Snap of a finger.
yeah,
I'm pretty sure it works. If it doesn't work like that, I would argue that like this is going to be some hardcore diplomacy, and violence being one of them, or military power being one of them, would have to be brought to bear in some way, shape, or form, either direct or indirect, to bring about what he was
and
trying to figure out a way to rid Africa, the continent, of the colonizers, and sort of bring them under my influence, expand my influence over that one continent. That would have been my immediate goal. And then from the economic resources that you can find on that continent, having them, kind of having that to kind of fuel your base of power with your superior technology, then engage the world, from that standpoint.
yeah, I mean, I think that there's benefits to arming resistant populations and so on and so forth. But like, I think what he was
This guy don't know what he's doing.
what he was talking about and how he was talking about it was he was taking cues, and the CIA agent even made an allusion to this, that he was taking cues from his CIA or from his training from the American government, and we all know how well the American government does at actually like rather than actually taking positive control, which was essentially where he was what he was after, and especially Jabbar or the the war lead or the leader of the war tribe with the rhinoceros, was the idea of we're going to rule the world right. You know, we're going to bring them into submission, and then once we get there, we're going to rule it right. Like that the idea is that he was going to use his U.S. training in order to rule the world right, and we know how well the U.S. ends up ruling the world right. It's like, no, they can dominate and control and influence, but as far as bringing justice to this world, we're not that great at it.
Well, what I was gonna say is I don't even think the United States rules right either. Like I think the United States happened upon what it happened upon because of the consequences of World War II, and it was perfectly positioned to assume the mantle of leadership after the damage was done to all those countries during World War II, and it being able to basically take a lot of Britain's former colonies under its own wing during that period because of the weakening of Britain. Like I think that's to me that was both a stroke of a master stroke of genius by FDR and also just dumb luck.
Mm-hmm.
Like let's call it what it is. It wasn't like they schemed and they plotted and they were just masterful because let's be honest, like the United States, we're not that sharp. Like
Mm-hmm.
the world is a little bit harder to control and do whatever. Like we just had a lucky break,
Mm-hmm. The chips just
way
fell
back
our way.
when that way back when that allowed us to do a lot of things. Like to say that kind of strategy will work now with countries like the United States, working against you, even if you are superior, you're just one nation. Like I think what I said would probably be a lot more achievable, and it might even take 20 years just to get that done.
Mm-hmm. No,
Because you've got a
absolutely.
lot of work to do just to do what I just said. But you're talking about like bringing down the United States and Britain. It's like what?
Yeah.
Anyway, let's get off of that.
I
Let's get
just
off.
quickly, I think that actually, I just wanted to say a little piece about I had about the movie specifically. We talked a little bit about in that uh, I think in a lot of ways, Wakanda was a parallel for the sanitized, whitewashed version of American history, in that a lot of the things that you were describing, a lot of like it was trying to justify, rationalize. The types of behavior that the United States took during its rise to power by essentially putting the United States in blackface and in Africa in a way to try to in again the sanitized version to justify their actions. And so like I think that there's a lot of different ways that you can see or watch that movie, and that it's probably worth watching even if you don't go out and see it in theaters. And even if the propaganda aspects of it and all that, like, watch with a critical eye, but I think it's worth viewing, and that you can
Oh,
gain something from it.
I want to say one more thing that kind of stuck at me too is like the resolution. Like some people will say like, well, he learned something from T'Challa learned something from Killmonger, and it made him better. And I'm like, well, it didn't make him much better because he didn't learn very much. Like, what was T'Challa's goal in the end? Like it seems very ambiguous to me. Like to open themselves up to engage in the world as and not be an isolationist. Okay, well, I mean now you've got the theme of embracing globalism. Great, but like, what is how? I thought like he was like, what, maybe Killmonger's cause was just, and maybe I can do it a better way. That would be a great lesson to learn. But it's just like he didn't show me that he learned it. What did he do? He went to the UN. Don't know what the UN's going to do. I don't know what that is. And then he said we're going to have exposing kids in the hood to tech. And I was like, well, you could teach kids how to use vibranium tech, but that doesn't mean that number one they have the infrastructure and the means to make use of that knowledge. Number two, they still face, unless you're going to let them immigrate to Wakanda and be Wakandan, unless you're just going to pick them up and take them to Wakanda, you really didn't help them in any real way. Like you just kind of, it's basically akin to me taking a laptop to like Ethiopia or something like that and giving it to a kid who's starving and saying, here's a laptop, and being like, this is going to solve all your problems.
Well, I'm sure they'll teach them how to make the stuff in human factories where they can be, exploited. Like essentially that's where that story leads. They go into the United States to bring these options in. The United States says, "Well, we're going to go to war with you and try and eliminate you from the planet unless you stop that, or you do it in a way that we accept. And what is the way that they accept? Well, how about you create jobs in the United States by allowing us to manufacture some of your tech, maybe some of your weapons. We're really good at making weapons. Maybe you let the United States make some of your weapons up until the point where then they have the weapons to be able to eliminate the Wakandans. That's how that story actually plays out in the world we live in today, in my
But
opinion.
but either way, none of that ever really ended with the uplifting of the targeted populace that Killmonger was trying to help. None of that did anything. None of that would do anything. Like this idea that somehow oppression can be lifted through charity is bullshit. Like the oppression can't be beat by charity because the people who have the wealth and resources to do the charity get that wealth and resources from the oppression in one way or another. And so if they were going to spend all of the resources they got from the oppression on the charity to fix the oppression, they'd be cutting off their own source of fund, of their own source of wealth. They're not going to do that. Really, it's more like here's some crumbs. Now leave my table or leave us. Get out of my sight. Basically, is what the charity really comes down to. And I think that when they pose that as some sort of solution, I think that's wrong. Like I think it's horribly wrong. Like the solution isn't individual charity. The solution is changing institutions, changing the society, or changing the communities in which these individuals live and provide opportunities for them. What it would take would be some mix of both soft and hard power and some change of the global arrangement to make that happen. But none of those things is accomplished through charity. So like the one thing I don't want people to take from the movie was that somehow T'Challa was doing it the right way. And that's the way they pose it. They pose it as if this is the right way to do it. And they use, the themes that we all have, the common thing. That's good. But what he did was not that. What he did was put up a 501c. Like that's not how that works.
No, you're absolutely right, and I think that's an important thing not to not take away from the movie is that, or what you're saying is that you don't want to take away that putting a 501c3 in the hood is going to fix the problems or is even remotely responsible or even meeting the low expectations that they set for themselves as Wakandans as engaging in the international community. It's an incredibly unresponsive and unimpressive interaction in my view, and so like I did not like that part.
Now here's a quote that I should have opened up with this so we can really understand like this story as like artful propaganda. Like that's what I think this is really artful propaganda by Disney, and I think it. When you take kids there, like you have to come and take them to the side and have already been working that mind to be resistant to this kind of stuff and to kind of tell our history and to tell our experience in the United States. Otherwise, they'll watch this and come out with like a warped thing. But here's the quote I'm going to read out for you guys. It says, "The production and let me say bourgeois. They use the word bourgeois a lot, and whenever you read anybody as Marxist influence, they use this word a lot, and it's actually kind of comical. Every time I say that word, I don't know, it just makes me feel some type of way. I just want to laugh. And maybe that's been the propaganda affecting me in some way, right? Who knows? But the production and dissemination of bourgeois ideology require a process of myth making that distorts and appropriates objects by emptying them of their history and then investing them with new meanings. The new meanings obscures causality and contingency in order to legitimize the bourgeois order, making its value seem natural, eternally given, ahistorical, and inevitable. Dominant discourse of social class mystify property by erasing the historical and economic conditions that produce, indeed require it in advanced capitalism. These discourses then replace history with a cultural myth that anyone who's willing to work hard will rise out of poverty, and that anyone who cannot rise out is either unwilling to do so, so lazy, or naturally incapable of any kind of humanity or human development, or also known as trashy. It's a weird sentence there. They had some weird punctuation, so like the flow of the sentence didn't read very well for me. But what I will say right there from that quote is like they said, emptying them of their history and then investing them with new meanings. This is why storytelling is powerful. This is why like we have to be really aware of what's going on. We have an ideology, a rule hinges on individualism. It hinges on things like that poverty is a natural effect of things. Inequity is a natural occurrence. It's inevitable. There is no historical actually there's no cause of it. It's just like a natural thing that just occurs, and trying to cause it will do more harm than good. That's a ruling ideology in this country. And like, we see that, clearly in a lot of the stories that it tells. And I think this movie, like it says it mystifies poverty by erasing the historical and economic conditions that produce and indeed require poverty in advanced capitalism, which means we have to understand that, like, just like I said, charity is not the solution, because the wealth and power accrue to people who actually have the resources to do charity. When they get it, they're not going to use charity to eliminate something that they need to accrue more wealth and power. They're not going to cut themselves stop profiting. And better yet, who is going to pay to end the situation that you profit from? Why would you do that? It's one thing to end and you still have all the money. It's another thing to finance the end of your gravy train yourself, to bring about the end of your gravy train. That's whole totally different. So we already know that it doesn't work that way. So like, that's just something that we have to understand. And when I watch this movie and them saying charity is like somehow the solution for poverty, or somehow a step in the right direction, or the way you should go about it, this is propaganda. This is propaganda. This is them mystifying poverty, erasing the historical and economic conditions, and then substituting it with like the solution being something that's never really meant to be a solution.
I think those are excellent points, and I know you're going to transition, but I am curious, and we don't have to answer this question now, but just something I'm thinking about is it realistic to think that you can defeat that by educating people to be conscious of it and to be critical of it, or is it more realistic to imagine effectively using that same tendencies and patterns to advance your own ideologies or goals?
So I believe it's going to be a mixture of both. So I think the best way to get things across to people is through storytelling. You have to employ this. So like, I think you have to use that as a means to educate people into what freedom is, into what civics are, into a lot of different things. Like, what the collective good is and what it means, group behavior. We have to kind of use storytelling to sort of make these things real for individuals, right? To make these things real. And then at the same time, we have to be aware. We have to make people aware of when they see certain things, like to identify, like, this is bullshit. Like, you don't have to accept it. Like, to not accept bullshit, because, I guess what we've taught or what we've learned should elevate us above that level of bullshit. That's not to say that you can become fully inoculated against propaganda. It works on all of us. Like, I still laugh at the word bourgeoisie and bourgeois. I laugh at it. Why do I laugh at it? I've never been able to explain why that word is so funny to me.
It just sounds fun and foreign.
I mean, whenever I read Marxist stuff, and I'm not a Marxist, by the way, I've read Capital Volume 1. I made it like most of the way through 2, and I started 3, and I just couldn't do it. And I would implore that everybody should at least give it an attempt. But it's some heavy reading, and you got to come prepared to really, tussle with what's kind of going on in there. But that being said, nobody's immune to propaganda. Like, there's a if you think that you can't be fooled, there's already somebody that's fooling you, right? Like, in many ways, you're fooling yourself. Like, we have to all keep it open that we can be fooled.
Mm-hmm. It's critically important, I think, and like, I can recall a conversation just like I was disputing with some centrist liberals about the Mueller indictment and how much money was being spent on ads and the effectiveness of those ads. And I just, without even thinking about it, just accepted the idea that, oh, they spent $11 million on ads, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, well, you know what? That doesn't actually quite sound right. Let me look a little bit closer. And it's like, oh no, what the indictment says is, there was millions of dollars spent on this organization, which one of the things that they did was employ these ads. The monetary figures that we have from the places where these ads were placed significantly lower, in the hundreds of thousands, not in the several millions of dollars. So you're talking about salaries and all sorts of stuff being lumped in with that. And meanwhile, I was arguing about the effectiveness of $1 million a month in advertising when that wasn't even what was happening. And so it's just that easy to get sucked into propaganda. And so maintaining a critical eye about every particular detail, well, it can be exhausting sometimes, can be the difference between, it can save you a lot of time in the long run.
Yeah, like I think as I've been very critical of this Russia issue because it seems like it's a Swiss Army knife. Like it just applies to all these random different cases. Oh, they hacked the election. Oh, they hacked the DNC and released this information. Oh, they these people are in league with this person. This person's a Manchurian candidate. Like it's very flexible. Oh, they influenced all these black owned YouTube channels. Oh, wait. No. Actually, the Black Lives Matter has been influenced by Russians and blah blah blah. It's like a Swiss Army knife. It's too versatile. It's really versatile in who it applies to, and it's really one directional. It seems to always be, kind of applying to people who have a leftward tinge. That anybody that's to the left of of the ruling ideology right now, neoliberalism. If you're to the left of neoliberalism, you've been tainted by the Russians. And I think when you have something that's that versatile, it is that wide scoping, it has that kind of reach where it's just everywhere, all over the place. No real explanation for it. It's
you
just,
want clean waters? That's Russian influence.
Oh yeah.
You want the ozone?
That's
Russian
the Russians.
you want liberation? Russians. You want anything you want that we don't want you to have, the Russians are telling you want it, and that's the only reason you want it.
Yeah, and so like it's a weird thing. Like to me, that just sends up red flags. Like, and also notice that the goalposts, from this original Russia thing have constantly shifted. From day one. They did, supposedly they hacked the election. Then it moved to they're hacking our infrastructure. Then it said they're doing cyber attacks. Then it said Trump's a Manchurian candidate. Now, they blackmailed Trump. Then it kind of moves to like, okay, well, did you talk to anybody from Russia? It's just like,
and now we're looking to the point where it looks like it's starting to look more like some people were just back trading using Trump's name with Russians, thinking that like, hey, I'm going to be talking to the president. You want to give me some money, like that's where the story is shifting towards, because that might be the only thing they're able to pin anybody on, and not even that, but previous dealings with Russia, economic and financial.
And look, money laundering or like back dealings with individual Russian people, not necessarily the Russian government. Like that's something that I can totally believe, but at the same time, that's not what you started this with. And I'm going to hold you to, what you started with this with. Like you found something, you dug and really found something, but you didn't find what you were looking for. You basically used something that had no grounding or no basis, and then you found something, almost inconsequential. Because if you're talking about just run of the mill corruption, this is everywhere. This is everywhere. That's not saying it shouldn't be punished. That's not saying I don't care. What I'm saying is you had an extraordinary claim, and then from this extraordinary claim, all you've produced is something very ordinary, not extraordinary. And I think that's kind of something that we need to kind of point out and be kind of cognizant of. At the same time, I'm not saying that these extraordinary claims couldn't have possibly happened. I'm saying as of right now, you haven't done very much work to prove something in the extraordinary realm. You've done very, very little to even prove ordinary. Truth be honest, you're struggling to reach the ordinary level, much less extraordinary.
Yeah, and I agree. And disclosure, me and Nick had this was part of what spawned the heated part of our discussion, in that we have some differing views overall. But I just want to start with some of the things that I think we agree on. In that, one, I think that the media has extremely over sensationalized whatever Russia may or may have not have done. Uh, the We've seen this in blatant propaganda from The Hill with a headline that said thousands attend uh, protest organized by Russians on Facebook. You can still see it on The Hill right now. I'm sure you'll be able to still be there as of when this recording's released. And if you click on the link that where they get the numbers of thousands of people, you'll find out that what they're actually talking about was an event that was going on nationwide, that had already been going on 4 days prior, or at least 3 days prior, and this was the fourth day that this particular ad was highlighting, and that there were on the ground organizers, not Russians, but just local people that were organizing these things across the country. And oh yeah, by the way, this big piece of evidence that shows how the Russians were interfering and so on and so forth was an anti-Trump protest. So the biggest single piece of evidence that shows the influence of the Russian propaganda, the thousands of people attending this rally, was actually an anti-Trump protest. So it spits in the face of the neoliberal message that the Russians were all about Hillary losing. The Mueller indictment spits in it by saying that the Russians had already given up on trying to make Trump win before the election even happened. So that clearly was not even, that's not even their point by the admission of the person investigating it, or by the citations in their own propaganda.
The goalposts keep moving, don't they?
Yeah,
Man, they're fast. We gotta be able to lock them down.
yeah,
I really think at this point, what I should have done when this whole thing started unwinding, I should have basically started whenever they make a point about what the Russians are supposedly doing, and they keep using a generic term, the Russians. It could have been a person in Russia. It could have been a group of people in Russia. We don't even know if that's the Russian government. And I think, treating, oligarchs in Russia doing something with their money, like that internationalists tend to do, for business interests or for whatever personal reasons. They got enough money, they can just do it for personal reasons. I think that should be treated a little bit differently than the government actions too. So if you're talking about saber rattling, if you're talking about acts of aggression and all that, these things can be levied on governments, as something that you should do something about. But if it's like an individual rich person, random, that it's just a rich person that has the money to do that, perhaps, perhaps you can't really do very much with your system being the way it is. Maybe you should change the law so that you don't allow them to purchase ads in the United States. Maybe you don't allow them to support super PACs, because if it's really just an individual person or a group of people or wealthy people in Russia buying ads for whatever purpose that they want to buy ads for, you also have to start talking about all the countries that lobby and buy ads for stuff. And since you have no problem with those things, I don't think you should have a problem with those individuals. If you ask me, do I have a problem? I have a problem with money in politics generally. So I'm going to be likely to agree, but I'm consistent in my political beliefs. And I believe that consistency has to be key also if you want to pass a law. It shouldn't be a law targeting Russia. It should be a law targeting all foreign entities, doing that. And then we can have something where we can really have a leg to stand on when you start pursuing these types of things, other than just it seems like this is almost just like pure theater. And what I have to ask you is are we here for policy when we talk about politics? Or are we here for theater? Because this Russia stuff is really turning into theater.
That's an interesting question, and I don't know if I could say that it's not for theater. I don't know if the show of democracy we have is actually functional enough to move it past the realm of theater and kabuki, or however you want to phrase it, and that it's really just a show.
Well, that's going to depend on the populace, right? Like when you demand something, power concedes nothing without demand. So if they're out there demanding, action and policy, and somebody gets up there and gives them theater, and they're like, no, we want actions and policy. That's what we want, and that's what we're fighting for. And if you don't give it to us, somebody else will. That's totally different. What we have right now is people saying things like, well, they changed the conversation. I hate when somebody says that, because you know what? You could say somebody changed the conversation, but healthcare has been a thing that's been talked about in the United States since the 60s. Just because, they stopped covering it in the mass media doesn't mean the conversation has changed. Like, people have been talking about healthcare for a long time. People have been talking about the federal jobs guarantee for a long time. I've yet to see that move onto the mainstream media. They've instead pushed like an expansion of welfare in the form of the UBI. They basically pushed that like in mainstream, and then they've had some TED talks on it. But the federal jobs guarantee is a lot better and a lot stronger. It's a lot more progressive of an option. But I've already laid out my thoughts on that. I know Richard, he disagrees with me vehemently on that.
Well, I mean, there's some points of contention, I guess. I mean, I want to start again just by saying that, like, I think that the media has totally over sensationalized the influence. They've propagandized with the example I gave with the Hill. The other one that's popularly circulating right now is like a protest in, I think it was Texas, of a new Muslim church being built or something to that effect. And they say, oh, Russians got this. They played both sides. That's how influential they were. And what actually happened was there's just a group of jerky assholes in that country or in that place, and they were influenced by some Russian ads to go protest this new building or whatever, and the people in that community that have had a long-standing disagreement with them and clashed with them multiple times found out about it and opposed it. And they, at least by their claim, they said that no Russian propaganda had any influence on it. And it's stated in the local paper, it says that. But if you go to the New York Times and you look at the article where it's the headlining picture of their article, they caption it with the, Russian influenced both groups, but nowhere in the article does it mention that one of the groups said that it had nothing to do with Russia and that these are just some jerks in our town that we clash with relatively regularly. Not even mentioned. So like the influence and the level of influence and the coverage has been propagandized, sensationalized to an extreme degree. I'm a little less skeptical than Nick about who did this or whether the Russian government was aware of this operation.
Well, I mean,
Like,
aware, I made the argument that, individuals could have done it. It could have been actions by a government. We don't even know. Like, so far, there's never been a real definition of who the individuals in Russia who have done this are, whether it's been the government, whether it's been something. They've used some very generic terms like, individuals linked to this group. Linked in what way? Did they go there? Did they have lunch with them one day? How's that linked?
yeah,
They,
like because I know the media has also
said,
linked Jill Stein to Putin directly. So like,
yeah, at the table,
yeah,
she's linked to Putin by being in the same place at the same time. It's just like, ooh, that word is really, really.
yeah, there's a lot of specious connections, and
clear.
I agree that the DNC not giving over their servers for independent investigation.
Oh, well, hold on. Don't bring that in.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying. Like that's what I was gonna say. You mentioned a bit about hacking and stuff, and I was just gonna say there's also a lot of conflation between what happened and what is like. So what I'm speaking about specifically for this case is the ads or posts that were on the social media networks and like that particular section of this Russia narrative. So like the other aspects are even more speciously linked. I think that when it comes down to the ads specifically and the posts between the IP tracing and the receipts for the actual purchases of the thing and some of them being bought in rubles and so on and so forth, it leads me to believe that the reasonable Occam's razor solution or explanation is that it came out of Russia and that Putin in one way or another was aware of it and didn't stop it. Made no attempt to put an end to it. Whether he instigated it, whether it was whose ambitions it was fulfilling, I can agree with you that we don't know that, and as that we can't. It's just speculation, but I feel reasonably confident thinking that the ads were purchased by Russian entities, by people in Russia, and that those entities were on Putin's radar, so he was aware of what was going on, and him not stopping it would be like, in my view, his way of approving it. Not that to say that it was all his idea or that it was part of some master plan or anything like that, just to say that it was something that he was aware was happening and didn't attempt to put an end to.
And I will say that as of right now, all of that is speculation. Like there's no evidence. There's no hard evidence to prove any of that. There's no hard evidence to prove anything actually linked to someone in Russia. Anybody can get rubles if you want, and then buy something through Russia. Like
Yeah,
you can
I
route
mean,
through
there's a
Russia
lot of
to buy
ways that
stuff.
I could
Like
I could
it's
also
not. It's not definitive enough.
I could also see the argument that this is intentionally trying to put Russian fingerprints on something that they had nothing to do with. That's also a reasonable
Well,
speculation.
again,
I'm just saying.
I'm not even saying that that's likely the case. I'm just saying the evidence provided doesn't prove what the mainstream media's narrative has been
Yeah, and for
on
me,
this
it's
issue.
just
Regardless, no matter where the goalpost has been,
mm-hmm.
the evidence has never backed up the narrative, and somehow former narratives are used as evidence to back up the current narrative. And I'm like, wait, your former narrative was not proven either. So like you're trying to piggyback off of a lie that you put out there.
Yeah, and so I mean, I like for me, I just to the it's easier for me to understand a scenario in which Putin is aware of and complicit at minimum of these actions than it is to imagine one where he's completely unaware and is
Well,
embarrassed by
again,
finding out that this group.
you're accepting that this stuff actually came from Russia and Russian entities that are linked to Putin, and that he approves
Well,
everything
and like
going
I
on
said,
in
and
Russia.
the alternative would be that then this is a wholly fabricated story, not just that the media and all of their coverage is fabricating stuff that didn't
Weapons
actually
of
take.
mass destruction ring a bell?
Yeah, like I said, I'm
Syria using sarin gas ring a bell? Twice they said that lie.
well, yeah, but just like
The Gulf of Tonkin?
yeah, like that the U.S. is lying about what happened is I think only
Well,
like I mean
I
that's
think
a
it's
fact
well
of the matter as
recorded.
far
I
as I'm
think it's well
concerned.
recorded by this point that we have a history of fabricating things that largely are not true.
Yeah,
I think there's a long history of the United States and the media doing that
yeah,
for
well,
one
and like you
reason or
don't see
another.
me
So
disagreeing with that.
yeah. I mean, I know you wouldn't disagree because you know. But I'm just saying, like, I think with that knowledge, we have to take and look at what's happening right before us with a very, very critical eye and start requiring some sort of hard evidence to actually start proving some of this stuff to be true before we just say, okay, this could have happened, but we don't allow, since this could have happened, that means these other things could have happened. It's like, no. You can't use something that you didn't prove as evidence for something that you also didn't prove.
Well,
Like
I
to
mean,
prove something that you want to prove later down the line.
for
It's
me,
like
for me,
anything built on a fallacy is also going to be false.
for me, there's this outrage being generated in the country about foreign countries influencing our elections. Like there's this huge outrage being ginned up. For me, the responsible thing to do is to take that and point it in the right direction, rather than try to fizzle it out and make it seem like, oh, this is just normal everyday stuff. Why are you so bent out of shape? My inclination is towards, well, this is run of the mill stuff, and that's why we have to do something, because if you think this was a big deal, try being in one of these other countries that has had this happen to them. Like, and if you can keep that connection, then you have somewhere to go. But if you just say, oh, this is just how things are done, well, then that's just what they're going to accept. And then so us doing it isn't any worse than Russia doing it, whether they
Well,
did or didn't.
again, I would say that, first we need to prove that Russia actually did this. All of that hinges on some sort of proof that this actually did occur. It was the Russian government,
Well,
that actually
that's the thing
perpetrated
is,
it,
like,
right?
I don't need this particular instance to be verified
Okay,
and
then
factually true.
when you say this actually happened, when you use that term, when you say this actually happened and is run of the mill, I'm assuming we're talking about this particular instance. Otherwise, we need to indicate what instance we're referring to, right?
Well, what I mean to say is that for other nations regularly interfere with other nations. That is something that we know as a fact of history, that any nation that can interferes to what
So this
degree
conversation is existing outside of the current Russian conversation, just so we're clear.
yeah, just to say that, like, whether this particular instance happened or not isn't as important to me as taking the sensationalized and the energy driven by what may be a completely false story and pointing it at the real problem that is being, that is at the core of whatever all this is being built around. The core
So
problem.
let me ask you this then: what is the solution? What can you see as some kind of step in the right direction to combat manipulation through propaganda by foreign agents.
Well, a recognition that if we're gonna do it, then we have to be prepared for people to do it against us. So like if the whatever the submission is that we can't avoid using propaganda in order to influence other nations to pursue our interests, even in the most noble ones, then we have to recognize that other countries are going to do that against us to try and further their interests and to diminish ours. And so we have to build a technique to defend against that. If the idea is we should try to limit or reduce or eliminate this from popular discourse, then that's another path. You know, we have to say, okay, we think it's wrong for Russia to come in and spread propaganda about the U.S., like, even though most of the things that they were saying was mostly true or just totally asinine. But anyway, we're opposed to Russia doing that. So we're also opposed. We're also opposed.
Premise in your statement was that Russia somehow did these things. I think we.
Well,
can you use a different example? So we don't want the viewers to believe that you're accepting the stuff without evidence.
Well, I'm speaking from the mind of somebody who has. You know what I'm saying? Like, what I'm saying is, I'm speaking to the.
Can we use the words like allegedly or something like that?
Okay, yeah,
at least like, at the minimal.
Yeah, that Russia allegedly did. This just feels foolish to me. I'm sorry, it does. It just like. But I know Russia. I know, like, I don't like whether the particular ads cited were.
Your belief in this is coming through, even though you're trying not to have your belief in this come through. Is what I'm telling you.
Like, I mean. Belief in what? In Russia influencing American elections? Yeah, I think that anybody who doesn't believe that is kind of being naive.
Well, what I would say is I'm into reporting the news or now analyzing things, and so far I have yet to see any evidence to prove any of these allegations, and any of these occurrences henceforth haven't been really proven out. So while I do hold out for the possibility that these things can be true based off of world history, like, yes, you're right. Things like this could be possible. However, you have to prove it first before I accept it as fact. Well, or at least give me something. Give me some kind of concrete anything. And so far, there's been a lot of smoke, but no gun.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, to a degree. I mean, I don't don't know what you need to see to believe that Russia is Russia tried to interfere in the 2000 election.
I would need some sort of document saying like, hey, this was the plan, or this was the intent, this was our plan.
Let me ask it this way: do you think that the Russians did not interfere in the 2016 election, or
interfere in what way?
Interfere, whatever word you want to use.
Influence what way? In what way?
Did they?
We have to clearly define exactly what I'm going to agree or disagree with.
Did they project any public influence into the United States about the election? Any, like, whether it be ads, posts, anything? Did they do that?
And now the new question would be, when you say they, do you mean government or do you mean individuals?
Both.
Okay, so I do believe individuals may have tried to pursue their interests with administrations one way or the other.
Well, like,
I don't believe the government did it as a form of cyber warfare. I don't believe that.
Like, my position is, it's naive to believe that countries like Russia aren't using things like the internet to influence major events like elections in the United States. That to me seems to me to be a naive position.
I think key to everybody who's watching this, understanding that what we're talking about is not what's being talked about on mainstream media.
Yeah.
We're talking about an entirely separate thing, and this mainstream media has kind of taken this separate thing and tried to blow it far beyond its scale and scope.
Well, they tried to turn it into something else, to turn it against, like, to make Russia into a bad actor in this, as if Russia is doing something out of the ordinary of what the United States does in Russia and around the world. And that,
going back to what I said, extraordinary claims, yet the evidence just doesn't reach that level. We haven't even reached ordinary. We haven't even proven ordinary. It's like, we're talking about extraordinary claims.
But we know we've hacked Russian emails, politician emails, and helped them get published. It's like, that's something that we've more or less admitted to, or the international community has accepted as a reality. And so, like, we do it. We know we do it. I mean, we've assassinated democratically elected leaders. We've done all these types of things. So to me, the issue isn't whether this particular ads or the even some of the more extreme stuff, whether that was Russia, to me is kind of irrelevant to the larger point of interfering in, or the interference in politics around the world is a problem. And when the United States does it, when Russia does it, or when other countries do it. And if we're going to get upset about Russia, which, like, whatever they did this particular election, whatever it was, if we're going to sensationalize it and get all upset about it, and rather than just debunk the inaccurate or untrue parts of it, I almost rather just capitalize on that propaganda and use it to turn not just against Russia, but against the idea of using propaganda to influence people towards your goals in a way that is actually against their own interests. Like, as from a philosophical perspective, you know, using this political energy to attack the philosophical argument of how propaganda is used in general. And if I admit defeat and accept the fact that there's no way to effectively push these messages without using propaganda, at least let's talk about how we defend against outside influencing propaganda as a population. How do we teach the critical thinking skills it takes to understand that the articles, whether it be foreign or domestic propaganda, aren't accurate? That's what I would like to see the movement be focused on. Where I'd like to see
but I mean, to me, that would be more so defending against propaganda itself, not necessarily defending against, you know, propaganda, foreign or domestic, right?
Exactly. Well, that's what I would like to, where I would like to see this energy transition.
The problem with that is there's no way the government is going to get behind an effort to improve critical thinking of the populace, because the number one pusher of propaganda in the United States is the United States government and the United States media conglomerates.
There's a great video from George Carlin about this. It's about America's full of bullshit, and it's around the Clinton years, but it almost perfectly predicts Donald Trump also. So, like on that point, I would recommend everybody listen to that.
We've been on here for an hour. You know, I think it's a good time to get close to closing out. But I want everybody to remember, since we're talking about media and propaganda, you know, I think this quote is probably one of the most apt ones. If you want to make your last point, I'll close out with a quote.
I just want to say quickly, thank you again for having me. Thank you for enduring the spirited conversation that we had, and not just being like, I think I'm going to do this one by myself, actually. No, but it was a great show, and I want to recommend people interested in finding out more about how I think about things or what I'm learning right now to check out the Left Pocket Project with Wendy Muse at Left PLC on Twitter, and we're going to be releasing our first episode of Reading Revolution very soon, where we took a look at History Will Absolve Me by Fidel Castro, and we talk about some of the similar themes that we covered here and that we've covered on previous shows, and that you've seen me talk about on the Discourse and elsewhere. So check it out if you get a chance. And again, thank you, Nick, for this opportunity to have this conversation. I felt like I learned a lot, and I think my position is better informed as a result of this conversation. So thank you for that.
Yep. You guys already got to know who this is. If you don't, look them up. If you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing. You know, Malcolm X.